I was standing beside the grave when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I already knew what it was before I looked. Not a message, not a call, just the silence continuing, deliberate, final. My sister stood a few steps away, her back straight, her hands folded like she was waiting for permission to leave. When the service ended, she didn't look at me. She walked past, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one she wore when we were younger. I said her name, quietly. She didn't stop. That was the moment it settled in. The funeral wasn't the end of our mother. It was the end of us pretending we were still family. Before she got sick, my life was built on postponement. I was the younger brother who always meant to show up later. Later when work slowed down. Later when things were more stable. Later when someone actually asked me directly. My sister had always been the one who stepped forward first. That was our quiet arrangement, formed early, never spoken aloud. She was practical. I was adaptable. At least that's how I explained it to myself. When our mother started forgetting small things, it was my sister who noticed. Missed appointments, burnt pots, repeated stories. I lived 2 hours away and told myself distance made me unreliable. So it made sense that she took the lead. I called every Sunday. Sometimes I missed one. Sometimes I let it roll to the next. I asked how Mom was doing in the same careful tone each time, as if consistency alone counted as care. As the illness progressed, the calls became shorter. My sister sounded tired in a way I didn't recognize. Not dramatic tired, flat tired. She stopped filling the silence for me. I'd ask a question, and she'd answer it plainly. Then wait. I mistook that waiting for judgment, and instead of stepping closer, I pulled back. I told myself she had it handled. She always had. When Mom could no longer be left alone, my sister moved her into the spare room. I visited once. I brought groceries and flowers and stayed for 2 hours. I remember how small Mom looked in the armchair, how my sister kept checking the clock even while smiling. When I left, I said, "Call me if you need anything." It sounded generous at the time. Now it sounds like an excuse. The truth is, I didn't want to see the daily erosion. I didn't want the responsibility to solidify around me. I had a job that demanded presence, a life that depended on routines I didn't want to disturb. I told myself someone had to keep functioning normally. I told myself my sister was stronger. And every time she didn't explicitly ask for help, I took it as permission to stay where I was. By the time Mom stopped recognizing me on the phone, the pattern was set. My sister stopped updating me unless I asked. When she did, her voice was careful, controlled, as if she were reading from a report. I noticed the change, but I didn't challenge it. I didn't ask what it was costing her. I didn't ask what she needed. I stayed polite. I stayed distant. And I convinced myself that love, expressed occasionally and without inconvenience, was still love. The day everything locked into place wasn't the funeral. It happened 3 weeks earlier, in a hospital hallway that smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. My sister had called me that morning. Not texted, called. I was in a meeting and let it go to voicemail. By the time I listened, her message was brief. "Mom fell last night. She's stable. They're running tests. I need you to come." I told myself I'd call back after lunch. I didn't. By the time I did, it was late afternoon. She answered on the second ring, already irritated, already tired. I said I was sorry, that work had been hectic. I said I could come the next day. There was a pause, longer than usual. Then she said, "Don't bother." I went anyway. I drove down after work, rehearsing explanations the whole way. When I arrived, my sister was sitting outside Mom's room, her coat still on. her bag at her feet. She looked up when she saw me, not surprised, just resigned. I started talking immediately. Traffic, deadlines, miscommunication. She listened without interrupting, her eyes fixed on a spot above my shoulder. When I finished, she stood up and said, "She didn't know who I was this morning." Her voice didn't break. That was worse. She kept asking where you were. I told her you were busy. I said I didn't know it was that bad. I said she should have told me sooner. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Her face changed then. Not anger. Something colder. Something settled. She picked up her bag and said, "I've been telling you. You just haven't been listening." Inside the room, our mother slept. Tubes, monitors, the quiet rhythm of someone being kept alive by systems she no longer understood. I stood at the foot of the bed, unsure where to put my hands. My sister stood on the other side, already adjusting blankets, already fluent in the language of decline. A nurse came in and spoke to her directly, explaining next steps, asking questions. No one looked at me. Later, in the parking lot, my sister told me the doctors were recommending full-time care. A facility, paperwork, decisions. She said it like she was reporting weather. I nodded, said I agreed. She looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I can't do this alone anymore." That was my chance. I felt it. The moment hung there, heavy and obvious. I could have said I'd rearrange things, that I'd take time off, that I'd come every weekend. Instead, I said, "Let me know what you decide, and I'll support it." She didn't respond right away. She unlocked her car, put her bag inside, and turned to me one last time. "I already decided," she said. "I just hoped you'd notice." After that, the updates stopped. No calls, no summaries. When I reached out, days later, she replied with one sentence, "I've got it handled." When our mother died, I found out from a third party. The funeral details arrived by email, formal and sparse. And standing there by the grave, watching my sister walk past me in silence, I finally understood that the distance I'd relied on wasn't neutral. It had chosen a side. After the funeral, the silence didn't lift. It thickened. Days passed where I checked my phone without knowing what I was hoping to see. There was nothing to respond to, nothing to correct. Just an absence that felt intentional. I sent a short message a week later. "I'm here if you want to talk." It sounded familiar, safe. It went unanswered. I started replaying small moments I'd never examined before. The way my sister used to sigh before answering my calls. How she'd stopped asking how my life was. How every update about our mother had slowly turned into a transaction instead of a conversation. I realized I'd trained her that information flowed one way. Effort flowed one way. Responsibility did too. I tried calling. It rang until voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't know what I could say that wouldn't sound like another delay dressed up as concern. I told myself she needed time. I told myself grief made people unpredictable. But underneath that, I knew this wasn't about grief alone. This was about accumulation. Practical consequences followed quickly. There were documents I hadn't seen, accounts I wasn't listed on, decisions that had already been made. When the lawyer spoke to me, he used my sister's name as the point of reference, not mine. I was a formality, a signature to be obtained, not a participant to be consulted. I didn't argue. I didn't know how to justify my place. Friends asked how my sister was doing. I said I didn't know. They nodded in that way people do when they don't want to ask more. At night, I imagined calling her and saying everything at once. That I was sorry. That I'd been wrong. That I should have shown up before it mattered this much. But each imagined version ended the same way. Too late? too heavy, too convenient. The truth pressed in slowly. I hadn't been cut off suddenly. I'd been eased out over time through my own consistency. Every time I chose comfort over inconvenience, every time I waited to be needed instead of stepping forward, I made myself smaller in the structure of our family. By the time I wanted back in, there was no space left for me. I began to understand that my sister wasn't punishing me. She was protecting what little steadiness she had left. Silence was simpler than reopening accounts she'd already closed. And as much as I wanted absolution, what unsettled me most was realizing she might be right. The moment that sealed it didn't come with shouting or tears. It came quietly, the way most final things do. I ran into my sister at the grocery store one evening, months after the funeral. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked lighter somehow, not happier, just unburdened in a way that hurt to notice. She was standing in line, a basket in her hand, staring ahead like she was counting breaths. I said her name before I thought better of it. She turned, surprised, then guarded. We stood there, two people who shared a childhood, a mother, a history that suddenly felt theoretical. I started talking too fast. I told her I'd been meaning to reach out properly, that I knew I hadn't done enough, that I was sorry. The words came out rehearsed, even though I'd never said them out loud before. She listened. She always had been good at that. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "I know." Then she turned back to the conveyor belt and began unloading her groceries. I waited. I didn't know for what. An invitation, a question, something to respond to. When nothing came, I asked if we could get coffee sometime. She shook her head gently, almost kindly. "I can't reopen that," she said. "I don't have it in me." That was it. No accusation, no list of failures, just a boundary, placed calmly, irrevocably. The cashier called the next customer. My sister paid, picked up her bags, and before walking away, she looked at me and said, "I needed you when it mattered." I stood there long after she left, holding a carton of milk I no longer needed. In that ordinary, fluorescent-lit space, I finally understood the weight of what I hadn't done. Not in theory, not in memory, but in consequence. What remains now is quiet. Not the sharp kind that follows an argument, but the settled quiet of something concluded. I hear about my sister through other people. She's doing fine. That's the word they use. Fine. It tells me enough. I keep our mother's things in a small box at the back of my closet. Nothing valuable. A scarf. A folded note with my name written in her careful handwriting from when it still mattered to her who I was. I don't open the box often. When I do, I don't feel dramatic grief. I feel precision. Each item points to a moment I wasn't there. There are practical changes I didn't expect. Holidays are simpler now, but emptier. I no longer have to negotiate schedules or traditions. There's relief in that, and the relief is its own accusation. I've learned how easy it is to live without friction once the people who create it are gone. Sometimes I draft messages I never send. Not apologies anymore. Those feel selfish now, more like acknowledgments, statements without requests. I see what you carried. I understand why you stopped waiting. I don't send them because understanding, this late, doesn't require her participation. The silence means I've been weighed and found optional, not unlovable, just unnecessary. That distinction took time to settle. I still think about calling her when something reminds me of our childhood, or when I catch myself reaching for advice that only an older sister would give. Then I stop. Wanting access isn't the same as having earned it. If there's anything I carry forward, it's this awareness. Responsibility doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, asking to be noticed before it demands to be paid. I didn't notice in time. And now, the story of my family continues without my voice in it. A real-life experience shaped not by one mistake, but by many small, comfortable choices that finally became permanent.